I spent nearly $50,000 flying my children, grandchildren, and cousins out to my lakeside estate for what I thought was going to be a celebration of our family history. I thought they wanted to see me, their patriarch, one last time while I was still in good health. Instead, I spent the entire weekend being treated like a waiter at my own party, only to discover that the reunion was actually a coordinated intervention to force me into a retirement community so they could turn my home into a luxury Airbnb resort. They thought I was deaf and senile. They didn't know I had already sold the land to a nature conservancy that morning. Before we get into the story, please remember to subscribe to the channel. It really helps us keep these stories coming. And I have a question for you. Do you think family reunions are a time for bonding, or are they just an excuse for relatives to show off and gossip? Leave a comment below. I read every single one. My name is Thomas, and I am 76 years old. For the last 40 years, I have lived on a property that my neighbors affectionately call the Point. It is 40 acres of pristine woodland jutting out into one of the clearest lakes in Montana. I bought it back when land was cheap and nobody wanted to live this far from the city. I built the main lodge myself, a sprawling structure of cedar and stone. And over the years, I added guest cabins, a boathouse, and miles of hiking trails. It was the place where my late wife, Eleanor, and I raised our 3 children. It was where we held every Christmas, every 4th of July, and every birthday until the kids grew up and moved away to the coasts. Since Eleanor passed 7 years ago, the house has been quiet. Too quiet. I have a caretaker who helps with the grounds, and a housekeeper who comes twice a week. But mostly, it's just me and the silence of the pines. I miss the noise. I miss the chaos of a full house. So when my eldest son Richard called me 6 months ago proposing a massive Miller family reunion, I was ecstatic. "Dad, it's been too long," Richard said. "We want to bring everyone. The grandkids, the cousins, even Aunt Linda. We want to celebrate you, Dad. We want to make memories." I was touched. I truly was. I agreed to host it. But Richard hesitated. "The thing is, Dad, tickets are expensive right now. And with the economy, well, some of the cousins are tight on cash." I didn't hesitate. I told him I would cover it. I paid for first-class flights for my 3 children, Richard, Susan, and David, and their spouses. I paid for coach tickets for the nieces and nephews. I hired a catering company to handle the meals so nobody would have to cook. I rented a pontoon boat to supplement my own fishing boat. I wanted everything to be perfect. The total bill came to just over $48,000. It was a significant sum, but I have done well for myself. I own several patents for industrial drilling equipment that still pay royalties, and I invested wisely in the 80s. I could afford it. And for the chance to see my family together again, I thought it was a bargain. The weekend of the reunion arrived in mid-July. The weather was perfect, 75 degrees and sunny. I spent the morning of their arrival making sure the guest cabins were stocked with fresh towels and chocolates on the pillows. I put fresh wildflowers in every room just like Eleanor used to do. The first sign of trouble was the arrival. Richard and his wife Brenda pulled up in a rental SUV. I walked down the porch steps, arms open, ready for a hug. Richard walked right past me, his phone pressed to his ear. "Yeah, the signal is garbage out here," he was saying. "I don't know if I can take the conference call." Brenda gave me a quick, distracted peck on the cheek. "Hi, Thomas." God, the drive was endless. "Is there someone to get the bags?" I blinked. Someone? I was the only one there. "I can grab them," I said. I'm 76. I'm fit, but hauling 4 heavy suitcases up the stairs wasn't easy. Richard stood on the porch testing his cell service, watching me struggle with his golf clubs. He didn't lift a finger. By evening, the whole clan had arrived. There were 30 people on my property. The noise was deafening, but it wasn't the happy chaos I remembered. It was the sound of complaints. My daughter Susan walked into the kitchen where I was helping the caterers set up the buffet. She didn't say hello. She wrinkled her nose. Dad, it smells like old wood in here. Have you had the place treated for mold? It's cedar, Susan, I said. It smells like cedar. It smells musty, she insisted. And the Wi-Fi is practically non-existent. How are the kids supposed to stream their shows? They could go outside, I suggested. The lake is beautiful. She rolled her eyes. They're teenagers, Dad. They don't go outside. Dinner that first night set the tone. I sat at the head of the long dining table, a place of honor, or so I thought. But the conversation flowed around me, not to me. They talked about real estate prices in San Francisco. They talked about the stock market. They talked about people I didn't know. When I tried to interject with a story about the history of the house, about how Eleanor and I had laid the stone fireplace by hand, my youngest son, David, cut me off. That's nice, Dad, he said, tapping away on his phone. Hey, Richard, did you see the comps for the properties on the other side of the lake? The prices are insane right now. Yeah, Richard said, looking around the room with a calculating eye. This place has a massive footprint. You could easily fit 4 or 5 luxury condos on the waterfront if you cleared the trees. I felt a cold prickle on the back of my neck. I'm not clearing the trees, I said. This is a sanctuary. They just smiled at me, that patronizing, sure grandpa smile that young people give to the elderly when they think we're being cute but irrelevant. The next day, Saturday, was supposed to be the main event, a barbecue by the lake. I had planned to take the grandkids fishing. I had my old tackle box ready, but when I went down to the dock, I found my fishing boat already gone. My nephew, Kyle, and 3 of his friends had taken it out. Kyle, I shouted, that boat has a tricky starter. You need to know how to handle it. He just waved a beer at me from the middle of the lake and revved the engine, drowning me out. I walked back up to the house, feeling a heavy stone settle in my stomach. I went to the kitchen to get a glass of water. The catering staff was busy prepping lunch. One of them, a nice woman named Maria, who had worked for me for years, looked at me with concern. Mr. Miller, are you okay? She asked. I'm fine, Maria, just a bit tired. They are very lively, she said diplomatically. But sir, you should know. I overheard them on the porch. What did you hear? Maria hesitated. She wiped her hands on her apron. I shouldn't say. But they were talking about lawyers and zoning laws. I thanked her and walked out to the sunroom. It has a screened porch that wraps around the side of the house. I could hear voices coming from the patio furniture just around the corner. It was Richard, Susan, and David. I stood in the shadows, hidden by the heavy curtains, and I listened. He can't stay here another winter, Susan was saying. It's irresponsible. He's 76. If he falls, nobody finds him for days. He's stubborn, David said. He won't go willingly. He thinks he's a mountain man. That's why we have to present it as a done deal, Richard said. Look, I've already talked to the developer. If we can get him to sign power of attorney over to us for medical management, we can list the property by August. The developer wants to break ground before the frost. Break ground? I whispered to myself. The plans look amazing, Richard continued. We keep the main lodge as a clubhouse, knock down the cabins, and build 10 luxury A-frames along the ridge. We call it the Miller Resort. We'd split the profits 3 ways. It's a gold mine sitting here, wasting away on one old man. But what about Dad? Susan asked. We put him in that facility in Bozeman, Richard said. The one with the memory care wing. He doesn't have memory issues, David argued. He forgets names sometimes, Richard countered. It's close enough. We get a doctor to sign off on mild cognitive decline. We get the conservatorship, and we move him. It's for his own good. He'll be safer, and we won't have to worry about the inheritance being eaten up by taxes or maintenance on this money pit. I stood there, gripping the doorframe until my knuckles turned white. They weren't here to celebrate me. They were here to harvest me. They saw me not as their father, but as an obstacle standing between them and a payout. I backed away silently. I went to my study, the one room I kept locked. I sat down at my desk and looked at the picture of Eleanor. "They want the house, Elle," I told her photo. "They want to tear down your garden. They want to put me in a home and sell our life to a developer." I sat there for a long time. Anger washed over me, hot and fierce, but then it cooled into something harder, something sharper. I picked up the phone. I called my attorney, a man named George, who had been my fishing buddy for 30 years. "George," I said, "it's Thomas." "Thomas? Aren't you in the middle of the big reunion?" "I am," I said, "but plans have changed. Remember that offer from the State Conservation Trust? The one we laughed about last year? The one that wanted to buy the land for a protected wildlife corridor?" George asked. "Yes." "Is the offer still valid?" "I believe so. They wanted it badly. They offered $2 million, which is well below market value, but they promised to keep it wild forever." "I don't care about the money," I said. "I want you to draft the paperwork. I want to sell it to them. Today." "Today?" "Thomas, it's Saturday. You have the digital files. Draft it. Send it to me securely. I'll sign it electronically. I want the deed transferred immediately." "And George?" "Yes?" "Add a clause, a life estate clause. I retain the right to live in the main lodge until my death. But the ownership transfers to the trust the second I sign." I could hear George typing. "This is a nuclear option, Thomas. Your kids won't get a dime from the property value." "That's the point," I said. I spent the next 2 hours in my study reviewing documents on my laptop. I signed the deed. I notarized it via the digital service. I transferred the title of the land that had been in my name for 40 years to the Montana Conservation Trust. The house was no longer mine to give, and it certainly wasn't theirs to take. I walked out of the study just as the dinner bell rang. It was the final night, the night they had planned to ambush me. I put on my best smile. I walked into the dining room. They were all there, smiling, wine glasses in hand. Richard stood at the head of the table. My seat. "Dad," Richard boomed, "come sit. We have a surprise for you." I sat down at the side of the table. "We've been talking," Susan said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "And we're just so worried about you out here all alone." "We found a place, Dad," David added, sliding a glossy brochure across the tablecloth. "It's in Bozeman. 5-star dining, activities, medical staff on call 24/7. It's like a cruise ship that never leaves the dock." I looked at the brochure. "Sunrise Meadows Senior Living." "And the house?" I asked. "What happens to the house?" Richard leaned forward. "Well, that's the best part. We'll handle it. We'll take the burden off your shoulders. We can manage the sale, invest the proceeds for your care, and ensure you never have to worry about a leaking roof again." I looked around the table. My grandchildren were looking at their phones. My children were looking at me like I was a transaction. I picked up the brochure. I smiled. "You know," I said, my voice steady, "it's funny you mention the future of the property, because I made a decision about it today, too." Richard's eyes lit up. "You did? That's great, Dad. It makes things so much easier if we're on the same page." "Oh, I think we're on very different pages, Richard," I said. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I opened the email from George and turned the screen around so they could see the digital seal of the Conservation Trust. "I want to introduce you all to the new owners of the point," I said. "What?" Richard asked, squinting at the screen. "What is this?" "I sold the land," I said calmly, "about 3 hours ago." Silence slammed into the room like a physical blow. You sold it?" Susan shrieked. "To who? How much?" "To the State Conservation Trust," I said. "And I sold it for a fraction of its value, but in exchange they have designated it a permanent wildlife sanctuary. No condos, no A-frames, no resort." Richard stood up, his face turning purple. "You can't do that. We have rights. That's our inheritance." "It was my home," I said, standing up to meet him. "And I heard your plan, Richard. I heard you in the sunroom. You were going to lock me away and bulldoze Eleanor's garden. I didn't—" "That was just talk," Richard stammered. I looked at them. 30 people who had eaten my food, drank my wine, and plotted my demise. "The deal includes a life estate," I said, "which means I get to live here until I die. But once I'm gone, the state takes the keys. The bulldozers will never touch this ground." "But the money!" David yelled. "Where's the money from the sale?" "I donated it." I lied. I hadn't, but I wanted to see them squirm. The room erupted, shouting, crying, accusations. I picked up my wine glass. I took a sip. It was a vintage Cabernet, and it tasted like victory. But the night wasn't over, and Richard wasn't done fighting. He looked at me with a hatred I had never seen in a son's eyes. "You're incompetent," he hissed. "I'll contest the sale. I'll prove you were senile when you signed it. I'll drag you through court until you have nothing left." I looked at him. "You can try, son," I said, "but you're going to find that this old man has a lot more fight in him than you think. And I haven't even told you about the changes I made to the will yet." My son looked me in the eye and told me he would drag my name through the mud until a judge declared me incompetent, all because I chose to save a forest instead of funding his luxury resort project. He thought he could use his high-powered legal connections to bully an old man into submission. He didn't realize that by suing me, he was opening the door to a discovery process that would expose his own illegal dealings and leave him facing a lot more than just a lost inheritance. Before we see who wins in court, please make sure to subscribe to the channel. It really helps us grow. And I have a tough question for you today. Do you think it is morally wrong for a child to plan their financial future around their parents' death? I read every single comment, so let me know your honest thoughts. The silence in the dining room following my announcement didn't last long. It was shattered by the sound of Richard slamming his fist onto my antique oak table. The veneer cracked. That table had survived 3 generations of family dinners, but it couldn't survive my son's greed. "You are out of your mind," Richard screamed, his face a mask of red fury. "You cannot sell this land. We have plans. We have investors." I sat calmly, sipping my wine. "I don't recall signing off on any investors, Richard. Since my name is on the deed, your plans are nothing more than fantasies." Susan was crying, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of frustration. "Dad, you don't understand. We were counting on this. The market is peaking. This is financial suicide." "For you, maybe," I said. "For me, it's peace of mind." The dinner ended abruptly. There was no cake. There were no toasts. My children and grandchildren stormed out of the main lodge, retreating to the guest cabins I had built for them. I spent the night alone in the main house, listening to the wind in the trees, wondering where exactly I had gone wrong as a father. Had I given them too much? Had I shielded them from struggle so effectively that they viewed wealth as a right rather than a reward? The next morning, the exodus began at dawn. I watched from the kitchen window as they loaded their rental cars. Nobody came to say goodbye. Nobody thanked me for the first-class tickets I had purchased. They just threw their bags in the trunks and peeled out of the gravel driveway, leaving a cloud of dust hanging in the crisp mountain air. I thought I would have time to grieve the loss of my family. I was wrong. The war started exactly 48 hours later. I was in the garden, pruning the roses, when a sheriff's deputy pulled up. I knew him. His name was Miller, no relation, and he looked uncomfortable. "Morning, Thomas," he said, tipping his hat. "Morning, Jim. What brings you out here?" He sighed and handed me a thick manila envelope. "I'm sorry, Tom. I've been served with a court order to deliver this. It's a temporary restraining order and a notice of a competency hearing." I took the envelope. My hands didn't shake. I felt a cold numbness spreading through my chest. "They're trying to freeze your assets, Tom. the deputy said quietly. "They're claiming you're a danger to your own estate due to dementia. They want an emergency injunction to halt the sale to the trust." I looked at the papers. Richard Miller et al. Versus Thomas Miller. The petition claimed I had shown erratic behavior, sudden aggression, and delusional decision-making. They cited the sale of the land as primary evidence, arguing that no sane person would sell a $10 million property for $2 million. "They think generosity is a mental illness," I muttered. I called George immediately. "It started," I told him. "I know," George said. He sounded angry. "I just got the digital notice. They are moving fast. They have a hearing scheduled for Friday. They want to get a judge to void the contract with the Conservation Trust before the title fully clears recording. Can they do that?" I asked. "It's a long shot," George admitted. "But if they can prove you lacked capacity when you signed it, that you didn't understand what you were doing, then yes, a judge could void the sale. We need to get you evaluated, Thomas. Immediately. I want a neurologist and a psychologist to document your mental state before we step foot in that courtroom." The next 3 days were a humiliating parade of doctors' offices. I had to answer questions like, "What year is it?" and "Who is the president?" and count backward from 100 by sevens. I had to undergo MRI scans. I had to prove I was a human being with a working brain, all because my children were throwing a tantrum. The results, of course, were perfect. I was sharp as a tack, but the emotional toll was heavy. Friday came. The hearing was at the county courthouse. When I walked in, Richard and his high-priced lawyer, a slick man from Seattle named Mr. Sterling, were already at the plaintiff's table. Susan and David were there too, looking like mourners at a funeral. The judge, an older man named Judge Holloway, peered over his spectacles. "We are here to discuss the emergency petition for conservatorship and the injunction regarding the sale of the Miller estate," Holloway said. "Mr. Sterling, proceed." Sterling stood up. "Your Honor, we are witnessing a tragedy. Mr. Thomas Miller is a beloved father and grandfather, but his recent actions indicate a catastrophic decline in cognitive function. He has impulsively sold a heritage property for pennies on the dollar, effectively disinheriting his family and destroying his own financial security. We have affidavits from his children stating he has been forgetful, aggressive, and paranoid. He made it sound convincing. He made me sound like a confused old man wandering into traffic." Then it was George's turn. "Your Honor," George said, standing tall, "Mr. Miller is not confused. He is disappointed. He discovered that his children were plotting to institutionalize him and develop his land against his wishes. His decision to sell to the Conservation Trust was a calculated, rational, and frankly, moral choice to preserve the environment and protect his home from predatory development." "Calculated?" Sterling scoffed. "He threw away $8 million. That is the definition of irrationality." I raised my hand. Judge Holloway looked at me. "Mr. Miller, do you wish to speak?" "Yes, Your Honor," I said. I stood up. My knees popped, but I stood straight. "The plaintiff argues that no sane man would turn down millions of dollars," I began. "That speaks to their values, not my sanity. I have enough money. I don't need $8 million. What I need is to know that the forest I walked in with my wife won't be turned into a parking lot." I pulled the medical reports from my briefcase. Furthermore, I have here 3 independent medical evaluations conducted in the last 48 hours. All confirm that my cognitive faculties are intact. I am not senile, Your Honor. I am simply uncooperative with my children's greed. The judge reviewed the medical files in silence. The tension in the room was palpable. Richard was sweating. He kept whispering to his lawyer. After a long pause, Judge Holloway looked up. "The medical evidence is clear," he said. "Mr. Miller is competent. The petition for conservatorship is denied. The injunction against the sale is denied. A man has the right to do what he wants with his property, even if his children think it's a bad deal. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. George patted me on the back. But we weren't done. As the judge was about to dismiss us, Richard stood up. He was desperate. "Your Honor, wait! You can't let the sale go through." "Sit down, Mr. Miller," the judge warned. "No, you don't understand," Richard shouted. "The money. The deal. I already took the deposit." The room went dead silent. Even Sterling, his lawyer, looked at him with shock. "Excuse me?" Judge Holloway asked, leaning forward. Richard looked around, realizing he had just stepped onto a landmine. His face went pale. I signed a pre-agreement with the developer," Richard stammered. "Blue Horizon Resorts. They gave us a non-refundable advance for the exclusive rights to develop the land. We used it to pay off debts." "How much, Richard?" I asked, my voice cutting through the silence. He looked at me, his eyes full of panic. $500,000. I did the math in my head. He had taken $500,000 from a developer for land he didn't own, on the assumption he could bully me into a home or declare me incompetent. "And where's the money now?" I asked. "Gone," Richard whispered. "It's gone. Investments. Debts." Mr. Sterling closed his briefcase. "Your Honor, I move to withdraw as counsel for the plaintiff. I cannot represent a client who is engaged in fraud regarding the subject matter of the litigation." "Motion granted," the judge said, banging his gavel. We walked out of the courtroom. Richard was standing in the hallway, looking like a ghost. Susan and David were crying again, but this time, the tears were real. They were facing financial ruin. The developer would sue them for the return of the $500,000, plus damages. They would lose their homes. They would lose everything. "Dad," Richard said, his voice trembling. "Dad, you have to help us. They'll put me in jail for fraud. Please. You have the money from the trust sale. You have $2 million. Just loan it to us. We'll pay you back." I looked at my son. I saw the fear in his eyes. I saw the desperation. A part of me, the father part, wanted to write the check. I wanted to fix it, just like I fixed his bike when he was 6, just like I paid for his college when he was 18. But then I remembered the conversation in the sunroom. I remembered him calling me a mountain man who needed to be managed. I remembered the look on his face when he tried to tell a judge I was crazy. I looked at George. "Do we have the paperwork ready for the second phase?" I asked. George nodded. He pulled a document from his bag. "What is that?" Richard asked. "This," I said, taking the paper, "is a restraining order and a notice of trespass. You are no longer welcome at the point, Richard. None of you are." "But the money," Richard pleaded. "Dad, they're going to destroy me." "I warned you," I said. "I told you that you were on a different page. You gambled on my death, son. And you lost." I turned and walked away. I walked out of the courthouse and into the sunshine. I thought that was the end of it. I thought I could go back to my quiet life. But desperate men do dangerous things. And Richard wasn't just broke. He was cornered. And a cornered animal bites. That night, as I sat in my study, the phone rang. It wasn't Richard. It was the developer from Blue Horizon Resorts. And he wasn't calling to apologize. He was calling to tell me that if I didn't honor Richard's contract, they weren't going to sue Richard. They were going to burn me out. The developer from Blue Horizon Resorts told me on the phone that he would burn me out if I didn't honor the fraudulent contract my son had signed. He thought I was just a stubborn old man standing in the way of a profit margin. He didn't realize that I had already transferred ownership of the land to the state, making his threat not just a crime against me, but a crime against the government. And he certainly didn't expect that I was recording the call, or that his arrogance would be the final nail in the coffin for my son's freedom. Before we reach the conclusion, please verify that you are subscribed to the channel. It supports us immensely. And here is my final question for you. When a child commits a crime to steal from a parent, should the parent let them face the full weight of the law, or is it our duty to protect them no matter what? Let me know in the comments. The voice on the phone was smooth, professional, and dripping with menace. He introduced himself as Marcus Russo, the CEO of Blue Horizon Resorts. "Mr. Miller," Russo said, "let's cut to the chase. Your son, Richard, accepted a non-refundable deposit of $500,000 on behalf of the Miller estate. We have a contract, we have a timeline, and we have heavy machinery scheduled to arrive on Monday." I sat in my leather chair, staring at the darkened window of my study. "Mr. Russo," I replied calmly, "my son does not own this land. He never did. He committed fraud. If you have a contract, it is with a liar, not with the landowner." "I don't care about your family drama," Russo snapped. "I care about my bottom line. You are going to sign a quit-claim deed, or you are going to find that living in those woods becomes very uncomfortable. Accidents happen, Mr. Miller. Fires happen. People get hurt when they stand in the way of progress." I felt a cold rage settle in my gut. This wasn't just greed anymore. It was gangsterism. "Are you threatening me, Mr. Russo?" "I'm advising you," he said. "Fix this, or we will fix it for you." I hung up the phone. I didn't panic. I didn't hide. I did what I have always done. I engineered a solution. I called the sheriff, Jim Miller, immediately. I played him the recording of the call. "That's a felony threat," Jim said, his voice hard. "I can send a deputy out to sit on your property tonight, Thomas." "No," I said. "That will just scare them off. I want to end this. If Richard took their money, they are going to squeeze him until he pops. I need to get everyone in the same room." The next morning I called Richard. He answered on the first ring. He sounded like a man on the edge of a breakdown. "Dad, did you change your mind? Please tell me you changed your mind. Russo has guys following me." "I'm scared, Dad." "Bring him here," I said. "What?" "Bring Russo to the house," I said. "Tell him I'm ready to negotiate. Tell him I'm ready to sign something to make this go away." Richard sobbed with relief. "Oh, thank God. Thank you, Dad. I knew you wouldn't let me down. I promise I'll pay you back. I'll make this right." He didn't understand. I wasn't saving him. I was setting the trap. They arrived at 2 p.m. on Sunday. A black SUV pulled up the gravel drive, followed by Richard's rental car. Marcus Russo stepped out of the SUV. He was younger than I expected, in his 40s, wearing a suit that cost more than my truck. He looked at the trees, the lake, the lodge, with a hungry look. He didn't see nature. He saw dollar signs. Richard scrambled out of his car. He looked terrible. He hadn't shaved in days, and his eyes were wild. "Dad!" Richard yelled, running up the steps. "Mr. Russo is here. We can fix this. Just sign the transfer, and they'll give us the rest of the money, and we can all walk away rich." I stood on the porch, my hands in my pockets. "Come inside," I said. We sat at the dining room table, the same table Richard had slammed his fist on days earlier. Russo didn't sit. He paced the room, looking at the beams, the stone fireplace. "Nice place," Russo said. "Shame to tear it down, but the A-frames will sell for $1 million a pop." "Sit down, Russo," I said. He smirked and sat. "All right, old-timer. Where's the paper?" "I have a notary in the car." I looked at Richard. He was trembling, sweating. "Richard," I said, "did you tell Mr. Russo that I had already sold the land to the Conservation Trust?" Richard froze. He looked at Russo, then at me. I figured we could undo it," Richard stammered. "If you just sign the paper for Russo, the trust deal gets voided, right?" Because you have seller's remorse." Russo narrowed his eyes. What is he talking about? "What trust?" I pulled a document from a folder on the table. It was the certified recorded deed from the county clerk's office. "Mr. Russo," I said, sliding the paper toward him, "this is the deed to the property." As of last Saturday, the State of Montana Conservation Trust owns every inch of dirt, every tree, and every drop of water you see out that window. I hold a life estate, which means I can live here until I die, but I cannot sell it, lease it, or develop it. Russo snatched the paper. He read it. His face turned a deep, violent shade of purple. He threw the paper at Richard. "You idiot!" Russo screamed. "You told me you had power of attorney. You told me the title was clear. I thought—" Richard couldn't speak. Russo turned to me. "Then you need to buy it back. Break the deal with the trust." "I can't," I said. "It's a permanent conservation easement. It's done. It's federal and state law now. Even if I wanted to, I can't unsell it. This land will never be a resort." Russo stood up, knocking his chair over. He looked like he was about to jump across the table and throttle me. "Then where is my money?" he roared. "I gave this moron $500,000 of company funds. If I don't get that land, I have to answer to my board." I leaned back in my chair. "That sounds like a problem between you and Richard," I said. Russo turned on Richard. He grabbed my son by the lapels of his jacket and slammed him against the wall. "You defrauded me," Russo hissed. "You little weasel. I'm going to strip you for parts. I'm going to take your house, your car, your pension. I'm going to bury you." "Dad!" Richard screamed, struggling. "Do something! Pay him! You have millions!" I stood up. "Enough," I said. Russo let go of Richard, breathing hard. "You staying out of this, old man?" "Not exactly," I said. I raised my voice slightly. "You can come in now, Jim." The kitchen door swung open. Sheriff Jim Miller and 2 deputies walked in. They had been listening in the pantry the entire time. Jim walked over to Russo. "Marcus Russo? Yeah? Who are you?" "I'm the sheriff, and I have a recording of you threatening to burn down this house. That's a felony count of terroristic threats and attempted arson. Turn around and put your hands behind your back." Russo's jaw dropped. "You're kidding me. This is entrapment." "It's an investigation," Jim said, cuffing him. "And you walked right into it." Then Jim turned to Richard. Richard was slumped against the wall, sliding down to the floor, weeping. "And Richard Miller," Jim said, his voice softer but firm. "I have a statement here from Mr. Russo's legal team, which they faxed over this morning when we alerted them to the threat, alleging grand larceny and wire fraud. They say you forged your father's signature on a letter of intent to secure that deposit." "I didn't. I needed the money," Richard sobbed. "Dad, please. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them you authorized it. Please, Dad. I'm your son." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had treated me like a nuisance. The man who had planned to stick me in a warehouse for the elderly so he could cash in. I walked over to him. I crouched down so I was eye level with him. "You are my son, Richard," I said quietly. "And because I love you, I am going to let you learn the lesson I should have taught you 20 years ago." "What lesson?" he whispered, tears streaming down his face. "That actions have consequences," I said. I stood up. "Take him, Jim!" Richard screamed as they pulled him up. He begged, he pleaded, he called me names, he called me a monster. But I didn't look back. I watched them load him into the back of the cruiser next to Russo. The aftermath was messy, as these things always are. Russo made a deal. He pled guilty to a lesser charge of harassment to avoid the arson rap, but his reputation was destroyed. Blue Horizon Resorts fired him. Richard wasn't so lucky. The fraud was clear-cut. He had forged my signature. He had spent the $500,000 on gambling debts and bad investments. He was sentenced to 5 years in state prison. Susan and David were dragged into the civil suits that followed. They hadn't signed the fraud documents, so they avoided jail, but they had accepted gifts from Richard, money from the deposit. They were forced to sell their homes to pay back the resort company. They are currently living in rental apartments, working jobs they consider beneath them. They don't call me. And I don't call them. I am alone at the lodge now, but the silence is different. It's not lonely. It's peaceful. The Conservation Trust sends out a team of young biologists every few weeks to study the water quality and the wildlife. They are respectful, bright kids. They ask me questions about the history of the land. They listen to my stories. Last week I rewrote my will. I left a small stipend for my grandchildren, enough for college, but not enough to ruin them. The rest of my estate, my investments, and my savings will go to the Conservation Trust to maintain the property long after I'm gone. I sit on my porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over the lake. I hear the loons calling to one another. I know that long after my name is forgotten, these trees will still be standing. No condos, no resort, just the wild. And that is a legacy worth more than any inheritance. Thank you for listening.
My grandpa's words really happened. I believe him. If you want more true tales like this, hit subscribe.